where are we at? 2 past the hour. We might go ahead and make a start. Yeah, no worries, Jacinta. As is always with these lunchtime, people kind of drop in and drop out. I think we've got quite a few registered for today, so we'll let people come in and do what they need to do. I would like to commence by acknowledging the land on which I'm on today, and I want to pay my respects to wherever you might be coming in from. But I'm on Wurundjeri country, and I want to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I extend that respect to wherever you might be coming from today. Today we've got a 1 hour session, and it's around fear, actually. And a lot of the time, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. A lot of the time when I am particularly in coaching, but also, in leadership development programs, fear comes up as one of these things that can really, really get in. So the fear that we're talking about today, won't necessarily be your fears of planes, trains, automobiles, lifts, any of that kind of stuff. Tree surfing for me, which I'll tell you about in a minute. It may not be necessarily those kinds of fears. And it's really to acknowledge that fear has a huge, huge impact and it can get in the way of us really unlocking and doing what we want to do. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. And so particularly as leaders, and whether you're leading self, leading other people, we want to really be able to spend this time with you to really see how we can turn it into action for you. And because it can leave us in a place of ambiguity and very much uncertainty. A little bit like this maze, which looks all kind of scary. And when I picked this image, I didn't even realize that it had water going all the way through it, which would be even scarier if we were to be caught in that. Let me just see who we've got. We're going to everyone that we've got. Jen, if you wouldn't mind just admitting people as we go through, that would be awesome. All right. So how can we turn this fear? So what are we going to be covering today? We're going to look at fear and reframing fear and really using it as this powerful driving force. So rather than ignore it, we're going to try and connect with it in a way which is safe, but also in a way which gives us some opportunity to do something with it. We're going to be turning uncertainty into action. So really looking at ambiguity and what we do in those circumstances. And we're going to be leading with confidence, resilience, and purpose. And so the last section of today will really be focused on how you can better lead your teams as fear and ambiguity and change might present for them. And we'll leave some time for Q&A. Does that sound okay for everybody? Brilliant. For those of you that have just joined, welcome. If you can turn your screen on, please do. And that way, today will be a little bit more interactive than our usual masterclasses. So we'll be doing a few more bits and pieces and potentially going into some breakout rooms too. So please feel free to turn your camera on if you can. Good to see you all. All right. So before we start today, some beautiful autumn colours there. I've got a tree out the front of my place, which this picture is not taken from that tree, but it very much looks like this tree right now. And so I'm going to invite you all to just come into some grounding. And I will caveat by saying I am not a meditation expert, and me doing a meditation course right now, which is what I am doing, that is for real, does not absolutely qualify me to do any meditation work. We're not going to move into a meditation, but I would like to invite you just to come into a bit of grounding, because in order for us really to connect in with fear, it might be just important to take a breath. This might be the first time that you've actually taken a conscious breath today in the middle of your busy, busy Monday. So if you are comfortable to do so, I'd like to invite you to close your eyes, please. And as you close your eyes, just become aware of your breath. You might be a bit breathless if you just sat down and you're after running to get a cup of tea or a coffee or a bite to eat. Just become aware of the breath. I always like actually to put my hand on my chest. So if that helps you right now, and if you feel comfortable doing so wherever you are, please do so. And just really connect into yourself. If you can, have your feet firmly placed on the ground. Literally just roll your shoulders back and down and just take a deep breath. So really connect into yourself, where you are right now. In my time zone, it's lunchtime on a Monday, and it has been a rushing around kind of day. And as I said, this might be the first time that you are able just to connect in with where you're at today. So notice that at this stage, just keep breathing in and out. You might notice that your heart rate is slightly slowing down. You might notice that some tension in the shoulders or the neck. It's just starting to loosen off a little bit as you breathe. And I'd love, if you can, to feel this calmness spreading through the body just as you are taking some breaths. And when you are breathing, I mean, obviously we all know how to do that, but if you can breathe in for 4 and out for 4 and just do a count for 4. So breathe in, hold, and then breathe out for 4. And we're going to do that again. So breathing in for 4 and holding. And then out for 4. Okay. If you're happy to, if you could open your eyes. I hope that felt like a little gift for you today. It's amazing the power of breath and just getting us to ground, and particularly in this session here, because we are going to be connecting in with, you know, fear and what might be getting in the way. We can feel very, very heady, very, very prefrontal cortex, and so the purpose of really doing that little exercise is really just to ground and kind of get out of the headiness and just connect in more so with heart and really what we're feeling. So what I'd like to invite you to do now that we're nice and hopefully feeling a little calmer, I have a question for you. And that is, what actions would you be taking if you were not afraid? This is not my question. This is a question from Susan Jeffers, and she wrote a book. Her original book was written 25 years ago. She republished in 2012, but the book is called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And some of you might have seen that book along your trip. But it's one of her questions that she poses in her book. What actions would you be taking if you were not afraid? I'd invite you to jot some things down. What actions would you be taking if you were not afraid? This is a copy of the book, if you haven't seen it. So feel the fear and do it anyway. And this is a big question, particularly for, you know, coming into a group of people that we may or may not know very well. So if you could pop your comments in the chat, if you're happy to pop some comments in the chat. So what actions would you be taking if you were not afraid? And I would love if we have a volunteer that could unmute and talk to that question. And I fully acknowledge that it is a big question on a Monday morning, Monday afternoon now. Would it look like a conversation with someone that you might be avoiding, or a conversation you might be avoiding? Would it look like applying for a promotion? Next level of leadership, perhaps? Maybe applying for a new job? Embarking on something new from a career perspective? What would it look like? Is anyone happy to share? And I'm very happy if you just pop it in the chat. Mandy.
I'm happy to jump in. For me, it's a leaning into conflict thing. I like to keep the peace. I don't like to be the one that unsettles the peace. I don't really know why. But yeah, I've struggled with that. I will do it, but I will avoid first.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And so if you could turn that into an action, if you were not afraid of leaning into, you know, the conflict or some more difficult conversations, what action do you think you might take if you weren't afraid?
I'd be more transparent with my thinking.
Yeah. So opening up to others and sharing that.
Yeah.
And what a gift that would be for them too, because that would help them to understand. One of my beautiful colleagues in Canada, Marie de Bruin, she wrote a book last year. She just recently published, but the book is called Understood. And as you say, that reminds me of Marie's message in her book, which is, you know, to help others understand us, but also to help ourselves be a bit more understood. So that transparency. Yeah, Nikki, you said so pushing for more certainty around the project, and that, and what would that look like for you, Nikki? Would it be questions, dealing with different stakeholders? What would it look like?
You hear me now, Rita?
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. Fantastic. Thank you. That's very much around resourcing and budget and getting some confirmation around, yes, from our most senior project sponsor within the VC's office, just how important this project is in terms of the sustainability of the leadership programming. Yeah.
And so for those that are non-university people on the call, so VC, you're a CEO equivalent, you're the Vice Chancellor. So obviously a big project and very high profile too, Nikki. Yeah. Jacinta, you're saying calm in the face of blue, which is so hard. So hard.
I know what I need to do. I won't share that with everyone.
Fair enough. You know what you need to do. And that's the thing. It's if you want to share. If you don't, absolutely fine. But you can see through the thread of the conversation. So thank you for those of you that have shared and contributed to the chat. When we can connect in, so what we're starting to do here is really activate. And we haven't delved into the fear too much, but we're starting to activate. We can do something with fear. And for the first part of today, I really want to connect you in with that, because fear can otherwise be very, very debilitating and scary to the point where it leads us to either, running, fight or flight, as we probably have heard of that terminology before, actually freeze. So we want to be able to connect in. So there are things that we can do, but often it's just thinking a little bit more about it and connecting head and heart to what we want to do. But in the stress of fear and that fear that we might feel, it can stop us from doing exactly what we need to do. So with that, I love Liz Foslian. So has anyone seen her little cartoons before? I use them a lot through my programs. And if you actually just go onto her website, Liz Foslian, she's got a whole bunch. And there's probably over, I want to say 50, but there's probably more on every single topic that you can think of. But as I was preparing for this session, I found this little one, which really resonated. And that is because when we're thinking about having a go and risking, which comes, risk comes with that having a go. The risk really is about taking the action, but often taking the action means that, we've got to be prepared to fail, because not everything is going to go the way that we intend for it to go. And sometimes that failure is really what can stop us. And so the fear kind of gets really, really loud in our minds. And then we go, oh, no, too hard. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to avoid, which is some of that language that we've heard from you and even through the chat. But part of acknowledging that risk is there, we can do lots of things to mitigate risk, but part of acknowledging that the risk is there means that we might have a better view and considering that, with failure, there is also that success. And so as we're building, whatever it is that we're building, as we're building careers, as we're building relationships, as we're developing ourselves from a personal growth perspective, there is going to be both failure and success. And rather than seeing them as opposite ends of a spectrum, actually seeing them as partners almost, that need to work together in order for this little, what looks like a little Lego wall to be built. And so sometimes acknowledging that means that we go, okay, I don't want to feel that fear. I don't want to feel scared. I don't want to feel worried. I don't want to feel anxious. I don't want to feel like I'm out of control. But acknowledging that it is part of trying to achieve success, whatever that looks like for us, can make it a little easier. So that's a little thought from Liz Foslian for you today. The way that I like to think about fear is an internal alarm system. Now, we would obviously not switch off our internal alarm systems within our offices, for example. You want to make sure that there's a beep, beep and a whoop, whoop that is evacuated at a time when you need it to keep you safe, right? And so in our brains, it works very much the same. We actually don't want to quieten that internal alarm system because it serves a purpose, but it is just an internal alarm system. It is there to alert us when there is failure and when our brain perceives that there's a threat. And then we've got some choice around what we do with that. So as I said before, it can be debilitating and it can be quite limiting, but if we are able to understand it a little bit more and then hopefully embrace it, we can see a way out of it. So some of you may have lots of knowledge about this, so I won't go into too much detail acknowledging and honouring the knowledge that is within our little Zoom room here. But I think in order to understand fear, we do, and we do benefit from understanding a little bit about what happens in our brain when we are exposed to an event. And so our brain will look at an event and it will either perceive it to be dangerous or a reward. Now, the three components of the brain, and there's probably lots more. If you're a neuroscience person or a brain person, please let me know, because you could take over this a little bit. But very quickly, we have an amygdala. And you can see where the amygdala sits in our brain. So it's kind of about there. We're looking at our brain, so center and towards the lower part of the brain. And think about the amygdala as the thing in our brain that detects threats. It activates our fear response. So what it'll do, it'll perceive danger. The amygdala kicks in, and this is the thing that helps you survive. So in the times of big woolly mammoths, we will have had, then as our hypothalamus kicks in, but it would have released cortisol and adrenaline and getting us ready for running and doing what we had to do to get away from the threat. What has happened, though, from a human evolution perspective, our brains have not been able to distinguish threat. And so whilst we're not fighting big woolly mammoths, or maybe metaphorically we are, we still have different threats. So when you perceive a different threat, like someone saying something to you in a meeting that feels quite intimidating, the brain perceives that and can perceive that as a threat, just as it would a big woolly mammoth. So the brain from an evolutionary perspective has not changed. The same kind of internal alarm activation systems go off. And that is how we are wired for that natural response. So we need the hypothalamus kicks in and then goes, oh, hold on a minute here. I know what we need to get ready for. So the heart rate starts to increase. We might get, ready to run. We might get that sweat. You might get the quickening shortness of breath, but you are ready to go because your body is ready to respond to that threat. Then the prefrontal cortex, which sits here. So the prefrontal cortex, think of, that bit just behind your forehead. That's the bit that governs our ability for rational thinking. And when the amygdala takes over, and that's why you might have heard it called as an amygdala hijack, it basically hijacks the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex goes, no, we're not doing any deep thinking here or any rational thinking. We're responding to a threat, people. And so the amygdala takes over, and basically then we are in what we call fight, flight, or freeze, which is probably something that you're aware of. No doubt you would have heard. Now, so is everyone cool with that so far? Yeah? Okay, let me know, obviously, if you're not. So that's all going on from a brain kind of physiological perspective. The brain is perceiving danger and it's responding. So back to our little slide here, we've got an event that occurs. The brain goes, oh, someone said something that's intimidating me in a meeting, making me look bad. And so then our brain immediately goes to survival, reputation. We might throw out another defensive comment. We might try and get them back, depending on how we're feeling that day. We go into very solo thinking. We don't tend to collaborate with others when our brain perceives danger. We go into very much tunnel vision. And the key feature here is that we go into short-term thinking rather than longer-term, long-range thinking. Whereas where you can see on the other side, when an event occurs, so let's go back to that same meeting, but rather than someone saying something intimidating to us, they've actually made a compliment about the work that we've done or our team, or they have agreed with one of our points and they're building on that, and we go, oh, I'm basking in some of that. That feels really nice. So we feel satisfied, we feel valued, we feel safe, we feel content. In terms of decision making, what's happening at the time when we're not feeling that threat, the brain prefrontal cortex is like sunshine, basking on it. It's like, this is awesome. I can do some fantastic thinking here because I'm not under threat. My amygdala is not taking over and hijacking. So I can engage in creative thinking. I am more engaging. I'm prepared to play with others. I'm happy to collaborate because I don't feel like I'm under threat. I can be focused on what I'm doing, but I'm not tunnel visioned. So I can achieve those moments of hyper focus when I need to, but I can also see that bigger picture. And we engage more so in that longer term thinking. So short term, I usually call that horizon one. It's just like, the next day, the next month. But then that longer term thinking has me thinking about subsequent months, even years. So if I'm doing any form of planning, and you can see, like if we had our scenario here as a strategic planning session that we were in with our team, we are absolutely required to engage in long-term thinking for that. But if we've perceived a threat, the brain just goes, amygdala hijack, we're not playing today, right? And it really limits it. So in terms of fear, and as I said, we're not talking about fear of aeroplanes or lifts or anything else, or tree surfing, which is, I've developed this fear of heights as I have become older, and I don't even know where it came from other than I attempted tree surfing with my children. And they were very embarrassed because I was about number 3 in a queue of 23 that had been clipped to a harness, if anyone's done any tree surfing. And I got out about 2 meters and I just went, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I just felt the blood drain from me, like I was going to faint up there. I wasn't going to fall because I was clipped onto a harness. But I was the embarrassing person that had to make all 20 people behind me unclip and get off so I could get off. Because you couldn't get off unless you completed the course, right? My kids were mortified. They were like, oh my gosh, you are so embarrassing. You're embarrassing, and now you're even more embarrassing than what we thought you were, right? They were mortified. So fear, it's, and that's not the kind of fear that we're dealing with today, but that fear can come and can develop from all sorts of different places. And that'd be the kind of fear that I need to work with a therapist. I reckon if I did want to attempt tree surfing again, luckily I'm not involved in any those risk-taking kind of sports. I'd be a crappy skydiver. But this is, effectively what's happening. And that's the physiology of the fear in the brain. Does anyone want to add anything to that? Or do you have any questions? Good, we can keep going. All right. So a couple of years ago, and actually more than a couple of years ago, probably 4 years ago, I came across Dr. Amy Silver's work. Amy is a clinical psychologist based here in Melbourne, which is my hometown. And Amy wrote this book called The Loudest Guest. And in this book, and this is her model, and I want to run you through her model today because I love it and I use it a lot with in my impact program and also in coaching. And what Amy does through her model is she helps us to control the fear cycle. Not control fear, it's an important distinction, but actually control the fear cycle. So Amy calls the book The Loudest Guest because sometimes fear can feel like a really loud guest. And she gives a little story in the book about, imagine if you were inviting all of these different characters to a party and fear turns up. So is anyone familiar with the movie Inside Out? The great Pixar movie about the range of emotions, and there's now Inside Out 2, which I highly recommend. But imagine you're having a party and you invite all of these friends and characters along, and of course fear turns up. Now, fear is not, not one, it's like, when you're inviting Auntie Mary out of obligation as opposed to really wanting Auntie Mary at your do, right? Your family do. I don't have an Auntie Mary, or respect if one of you have an Auntie Mary, of course. You can't control, you've got to have that person there. And so in this case, we've got to have fear there, but we can control the impact of fear. And so what Amy does is takes people through a process of firstly recognizing, like, what is the fear? What is it that is creating that feeling of being scared, anxious, out of control, challenged, whatever it might be? What is it? And then Amy encourages us to really move into self-compassion. And so some of the advice that she gives around that is, well, if you were talking to 6-year-old Rita, who had just, clipped onto a harness, and 6-year-old Rita was scared of being out there and wanted to come back, what would you say to 6-year-old Rita? And that day, I was not saying, oh, it's all right, like you'll be fine. You do hard stuff all the time, Rita. Like all these things that I would have said to 6-year-old Rita, I was internally having a field day. You're an idiot. You're embarrassing. It wasn't even that high. Where is this irrational fear of heights come from? Like all of this chatter, right? That was flooding my brain. That's what was happening. But I wouldn't have spoken to 6-year-old Rita in that way. I would have had a lot more self-compassion. And if it's hard for you to connect in with 6-year-old you, then think about someone that you have compassion for. And usually, if you've been exposed to little kids, it's relatively easy. Not always when they're why, not listening. It's pretty easy to not be compassionate at that point. But on a good day, just pretend you're being compassionate, right? What would you have said? What would you have done, right? And so Amy encourages us to adopt that notion of self-compassion towards ourselves and not beat ourselves up about the fact that we're scared or anxious or have fear around a particular problem. And then she encourages us to separate ourselves. So really to de-identify. We are not that fear. So I might not have the confidence to apply for my next promotion, but that doesn't mean that I'm not confident. It means that that is what I'm feeling. So there is a disassociation, if you like, or a separation between what it is that we are experiencing and us. That's an important distinction, because otherwise we can really take on that character of, I am the thing. I'm not confident, I'm not courageous. I try and avoid, I let people walk all over me, whatever it is, right, that we might be feeling, so to separate. And then off the back of that, once we've got some space, then we can evaluate. We're not close to it anymore, or we're not as close to it. And sometimes, that little grounding exercise we did today, really, really, really super simple. And I'm sure if you've got a meditation practice, you're going to be doing things that are more sophisticated and in depth than that. But even that is enough to separate ourselves from the thing. Then we can evaluate. Then we can properly have a think about, well, what's going on here? Then after we evaluate, we've got some options. But only through that evaluation process do we gather those options. And can we think about them? Because that space, again, we've got prefrontal cortex then better engaging in. It's not amygdala hijack, or that feeling of being out of control and therefore doing something because we feel like we're out of control. So then we're able to better evaluate. We've got decisions, and then we can experiment. And that doesn't mean we have to implement all the decisions, but we're regaining back control and some choice based on whatever it is that we have come up with. What do you think about that model? Comments or questions? Is anyone using anything similar?
Rita, I really like the idea of the self-compassion one, and I'm aware that that's something that I find quite difficult to do at the time. So I think for me, that's something that I'm trying to learn how to be able to kick that into gear at the right time.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks, Jodie.
I'll just note, by the way, I relate to that issue with heights developing when, seemingly out of the blue. That happened for me too. I noticed I was feeling anxious about things that didn't cause me anxiety in the past last year. And I tried very hard just to talk myself out of it, just to kind of reason myself out of it, in a pretty non-compassionate way, as though, my frontal lobe could take care of what was happening with my amygdala, just through force of will. So a model like this is very helpful.
Thanks, Helen. And it is, we do hear it, that we do develop, and we can develop a sense of, or responding differently to something, even though we may have had that experience in the past. There's probably lots of reasons for that. I think for me, when I was sharing my the tree surfing incident that occurred, I was speaking to a participant actually in a program at the time. We were running through this, and she got stuck in a lift. And the lift, she got stuck. It was probably floor 32 in the building. She was not able. It was 18 months before she could go back into a lift. And it was so debilitating for her. It was just post-COVID, so she didn't have to come into the office every day. But you can imagine when she did, she couldn't work up on that floor. She couldn't get into a lift. And so, these things can become very, very debilitating and very limiting in terms of what we are able to do. All right, so we're going to have a play in a moment with Amy's model. And I'll flash it up for you again. But before we do that, I've got some more questions for you, if that's okay. So I want to take you back to where we started today. So I asked you about, if you weren't afraid, what actions would you take? And when we had some shares, which is awesome. And now what I'd love you to do, if you're comfortable to do so, is really identify the fear. So what is the fear that is stopping you from doing what you want? And even, you might not have a nice, neat word for it or a nice, neat theme for it, and that's fine. It can look messy, and it can look like, 6 dot points, and it can look like all that's fine. I'm not necessarily going to ask you to share this. I just really want you to stay with it for a minute or two with these questions. So what is the fear that's stopping you? Where can you feel it? Is there a place where you can feel it in your body? can you visualize it? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? You know, describe what it looks like if you can. So I'll give you a minute or so to do that. All right. Has everyone been able to get through the questions? Have you been able to identify the fear, understand and identify where you can feel it, visualize it? I won't ask you to share that right now, but I just want you to hold on to that and just hold on to it as we go into this next part, which is really working our fear through Amy's model. So I'd invite you to grab a piece of paper if you've got one handy. And if you've been able to connect in with that fear, which is this recognition piece, I think this is what I'm fearful of. I'd love you to run your fear through this cycle. So what decisions, so run it through. What is the thing I'm worried about, which we've already started to identify with. If I was to start to initiate a little bit more self-compassion for myself, what would that look like? Or you might want to leverage things that you've already done. So something I will do not too often, but sometimes, and I've got to, I won't do this on a train or anything, but I'll just give myself a hug, right? And it's particularly if I need that soothing straight away and there's, member of the family or the dog are not around. And sometimes like teenagers are like, what are you hugging me for? Or they'll go, Mummy, you're sick? Like, what's wrong? So sometimes to avoid all that, it's like, I'll just give myself a little hug, right? So that can be something that you might do, or just speaking to yourself, as I said, like, that 6-year-old reader or that 16-year-old reader, whatever it might be. Once you've identified it, so you've got that separation, what is that thing? And that acknowledgement that I am not thing, I'm not the fear, I'm not the anxiety, I'm not, whatever byproduct of it, lack of confidence, whatever it might be, I'm not that thing. So we're not identifying it. Then we're evaluating, again, looking at our options, making a decision and experimentation. And so today, if you could move to what decisions, have presented for you as you run through that fear cycle, that'd be awesome. Obviously we're not going to get into experimentation right now, given we've got about 25 minutes left, but you should be able to come up with some ideas. Has everyone had a chance to walk through that fear cycle with their fear? Okay. Does anyone want to unmute and just talk through their experience? Is there something that, maybe a decision that's presented for you? You certainly don't need to go into the full extent of what you're worried about, but have some decisions presented.
Yeah, Brett, I think from my point of view, they have. And I think just going through a framework like this helps with the separation for me. So just making it a little bit more analytical and a little bit more scientific pulls it out of me and into a better space.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Nikki. Is anyone surprised at their reaction, even just working through the model? Has anything come up for you that you wanted to share? You can see that the model gives us time and space, and it gives us some tools. And I think the most important thing here is that we're separating from it. So from whatever it is that's creating that fear or that anxiety or that concern for us. And as much as what leaders typically don't like me saying this, and gosh, it's a life lesson for me, it's the slowing down piece. You know, this actually forces us to slow down and look at it in a much more considered way. Yeah. What's the worst that can go wrong? Thanks, Mandy. And often even that question just helps us to gain a little bit of perspective. And it's also time, like at the time, if we perceive it to be a threat to career or to reputation, you know, we can really kind of get very absorbed in what could be the impact of that. But when we just kind of slow down and go, okay, well, really, what's the worst that can happen? It's a really great question just to gain that perspective. All right. So that's a model that you can play with. The Loudest Guest is available through Booktopia and also through Amy's website. It's a really good one on Audible. So a couple of times I've referred it on to some coaching clients, particularly on Audible, which has been super useful. Yeah, good, Rebecca. So just give it a go. Like it is, sometimes it's that confidence that we need around, just give it a go. Like, you know, what is the worst that could happen? I'm just going to give it a go. And it's a really nice segue. Thank you, Rebecca, because that wasn't even planned and rehearsed between the two of us. But it's a nice segue into this inner chatter. I just started reading a book which was recommended to me called Chatter by Ethan Kross. And the book is about the internal dialogue. And Ethan's work, fascinating, right? So over the last 20 years, he's a researcher. He researches people's internal dialogue and their thoughts. Like, how cool is that, right? How cool. And he talks about, like, they did this study in, you know, with New York citizens and just the internal chatter. I reckon that's so fascinating to be able to research that. The book does, you know, go on, and I'm not at this part yet, but I'm told that it does go on to talk about, you know, what we can do to create this separation and really break the impact of inner chatter, particularly when it becomes unhelpful. So some examples that you've got there, and I think particularly in leadership, you know, in decision making, should I wait until this is perfect? Like, should I wait until, you know, I've got this, you know, approval? Maybe, you know, maybe you do need the approval. So I don't know, whatever rules you've got in your institution. But basically, do I wait until it's perfect? And what does perfect even mean? You know, I can't speak up yet. I'm not prepared. I don't know if I haven't got my thoughts, you know, right. So I say nothing, and then potentially I'll lose my opportunity. In delegation, if I don't do it myself, then it won't be right. Confidence. Others have more experience. Like, you know, what even gives me a right to be here? So unchecked, if unchecked, it drives this sense of over control, and we can become very, you know, micromanagey. We can move into avoidance, burnout, and this imposter syndrome if left unchecked. So there's this voice of the chatterbox that you see there on the left, and then there's this voice of power. And as you read through both, which I won't read them to you, but you can see that there's clearly a reframe that can go on here if we choose. And that we need to be intentional about that. So what if I fail, you know, versus, but I can handle anything that comes, you know, to me. So this is a real sense of conviction. I'm not good enough. I bring value just as I am. You know, so we're reframing and really leveraging off, you know, a growth mindset, whether we know it or not. But when we're reframing, we are moving very much from fixed mindset, which is the distinguishing factor with what's on the left there versus that growth mindset, which is what is on the right. So it is important for us to really connect in with, well, what does our inner chatter say when fear shows up? And I think I shared with you that, you know, when I was that day out with the kids, I felt pretty hopeless, actually. And because I didn't understand where this was coming from and I'd never felt it. So I was like, where is this coming from? How pathetic, how embarrassing, how I felt really like I'd put everybody out. Like I'd made everyone else had to unclip. I didn't make them, but they had to unclip in order for me to get off. So, you know, but what would my higher self have said instead? You know, having the courage and in, you know, subsequent, I guess, thinking with this, but actually having the courage to go, I'm not ready for this. That's pretty big. And for someone like me, who's always throwing themselves in and high achiever or an A type personality, that's a big thing to go, I actually don't think I'm equipped to do this. And for some of you, that may resonate. It's not always necessarily that we don't feel that we're ready. It can be that the problem is we're always ready. So then when we've got to face the fear around I'm not ready, that can be quite confronting. So in looking at the inner chatter and really analysing it, we're giving it a personality, really. And it's a bit like what Amy talks about with the loudest guest. If we can give it a personality and a persona, we can visualise it and we can acknowledge it, but effectively tell it to go away when it doesn't serve us. And then particularly as we're looking at, so far we've looked a lot as, at an individual level, but as we're looking at leading others through fear and ambiguity, and I know that for most of you, if not all of you, you're in organisations where there's change and the change comes through thick and fast all the time. Unrelenting is what leaders say to me, most leaders actually. And we like to ask very, very regularly, what's going on for you? What's happening in the organisation? And they're saying change, ambiguity. And I think there's a lot happening within our external environment, which then impacts decision-making in the internal environment. But I've created a little model here, which really is designed to anchor us back into our purpose. So the way you use this is that what is my purpose? What are my goals? What is it that I need to achieve? What is it that my team needs to achieve? And then we look at risk. We look at confidence, resilience, effort, and trust. So in risk, we're assessing the threat. So what is here? What's really at stake? That'll give us a better sense of low, medium, high risk, and then mitigation factors. In terms of my confidence and my ability to deal with this, I'm going to tap into my strengths. And you can do that through a strengths finder, through Gallup. You could do it through, the VIA character strength survey, or you could just sit down with a piece of paper and the team and go, what are our strengths? What are we famous for? What am I famous for? What am I really known for? Because we just excel at that thing, or we offer that thing. That's a value that we provide. And really, when we can connect in with our strengths, that gives us an ability to face into the fear, because it reminds us of what we're good at and what we're strong at. Then there's an element of resilience here. And with resilience, it's about recovering, because there's going to be adversity, there's going to be challenging situations, and then that persistence that comes with it. Effort acknowledges that this isn't going to be a walk in the park. I'm going to have to put some effort into this, and so is my team. So engage the will. Really connect in. And this is really important when we're connecting in with why are we doing this? That can often help us to engage that will. And then trust is build the net. And that is build the net with those around you, but it's also trust in yourself. You're part of that safety net. And you knowing that you've got the confidence and the ability, or that you are able to learn if you don't have the capability or the ability right now, certainly helps to build trust. So when we look at trust, it's trust in self, but also trust in others. On this next slide, and you might want to take a little picture of this, and we'll give you this in the recording, but these are some coaching questions that you can use with your team. So when you are looking to explore the purpose and the goals, the risk, the effort, trust, confidence, resilience, I'm offering you 2 questions, and we could certainly come up with more, but 2 questions that will help you to have a coaching conversation with people in your team. When they're fearful about something, when they're concerned, when they're anxious, when there's a challenge, try and tap into where is this coming from. You can actually use it as a sequence. So start with purpose and then all the way through to resilience. And these questions might be useful for them in uncovering, where the blockage is and what they're fearful of. And as I said, we'll provide these in the recording, but also the slides, which will pop onto our community group. Susan Jeffers offers us 5 truths about fear. She says the fear will never go away as long as I continue to grow. So in the opening frame today, I talked to you about risk. And as long as there is opportunity to grow, there's always going to be risk. And with that risk comes that fear, and particularly fear of failure. So that's always going to be there. The only way to get rid of the fear is doing something. It's to go out and to do it. Now, I could pop out and tree surf again. I don't think you'll find me, though, doing that anytime soon, but I might take some baby steps. I might do, something in between that's not quite that, that exposure therapy, which I'm sure we've all heard about. But, action is the antidote to fear. but it's making sure that you feel well equipped to be able to move into that action so you're not doing yourself more harm in the process. The only way to feel better about myself is to go out and do it. And we've heard some of that today. Jay, if I stumble, I'll learn and adjust. And that was, I think you're quoting someone up above. But, it's that perspective that we've talked about. Give it a go. Just give it a go. Not only am I going to experience fear whenever I'm on unfamiliar territory, but so is everyone else. And isn't that sobering? And we might not, walk around going, but, if you're supporting someone, it's not going to be very empathetic to go, oh, don't worry, everyone's got that same problem. But when you're dealing with something, it's supporting to know that, or hopefully it feels supporting that I'm not the only one that's going to be experiencing this unfamiliar territory. And then the last one, so powerful, pushing through fear is less frightening than living with the underlying fear that comes from a feeling of helplessness. And I guess this goes back to do something, so pushing through it, and even if it's little baby steps and really acknowledging where you're at and being able to push through is going to at least get you into that action and doing something. So that's offered again by Susan Jeffers in her book. Another little great book. This one's a teeny tiny one. You would read this in less than an hour by Chris Helder. It's called Useful Belief. And he talks about, in terms of facing into fear, Chris talks about coding success. And he says, to be the person you really want to be, ask yourself, how would that person act in this situation? And then act as if you are that person. Do the things they would do and notice how quickly things start to change. So there is a little bit of this fake it till you make it, I think, in Chris Helder's quote here. But I like it because this acting as if gets you taking on a little bit of that persona. It's not fake it till you make it. It's acting as if. So put the circumstances around you so, you can speak up. So you can have a courageous conversation. I find that really, really super useful. So that's Chris Helder's book if you want to have a look, and that's Useful Belief. And I reckon that takes us to the top of the hour. So before I flash up a few other slides, just to, if you're not connected into our community, but I'm curious for questions or any comments or insights that anyone wants to share. Anything coming up for anybody? Are you feeling... Sorry, go ahead.
This is a strange one, but I've just enrolled myself in a creative writing course, which is something that I love to do. But it was really interesting, a lot of fear in terms of me actually putting myself down on the page and so forth. And just going through everything that you've gone through this morning, one of the lecturers sort of said for one of our particular assessments, look, this is a very niche type of writing. It's highly unlikely anyone else is ever going to read it. You probably won't get published, blah, blah, blah. And that just made me feel so much better because it just took all of the pressure off and all of this. All of a sudden the fear disappeared, and that it was then I think that you start to realise that so much of it is about all of these, as you say, those hijack situations where reality really doesn't come into it anymore. It's just this inner sense of turmoil or fear or whatever it might be that really doesn't hold an awful lot of value a lot of the time.
Yeah. Nikki, I had a very funny situation only yesterday. So this is my book, shameless plug, right? You Are How You Lead. So I get home from a movie yesterday afternoon, and my oldest daughter, my year 12er, has got my book on the kitchen table. And today, so she's preparing for a psychology SAC, so a psychology assessment that's today in an hour or so. She's got the book on the table, and I was like, oh, I said, Sienna, what's the book doing on the table? And I was expecting her to say, oh, Mum, there's a chapter in there that's covering what we're doing. No, she said, Mum, I just used it as a ruler because I needed to rule my page. I'm like, right, okay. And my husband looked at me and giggled, and I just went, I'm glad the book's coming in for use, Sienna, as a ruler instead of the book. But it's right, like no one will read it, because the reality is that, I don't know, you're all telling me that you've read it, but it might be used as a ruler instead of being read. So that's, yeah, it resonates to me, Nikki, right, like no one will read it. I'm sure they will read it, but just then you can be free and you can do whatever you want with it. Good luck with the creative writing.
Thank you.
That was very funny. Thank you, Sienna, for just kids are humbling, aren't they? They're very, very humbling. All right. Thank you for coming along today. If you've enjoyed the masterclass, then jump on every month. We have a masterclass. Actually, for the month of June, while I've got you all, we're running a couple of different initiatives. So one is our Leader as Coach program. The You Are How You Lead book has the coaching model in there, but we're running a public program, which we never do. So the 4th and 5th of June, we're running it here in Melbourne. It's a 2-day program. We'd love to see either you or some of your people there. And the other thing we're running is our Deliberate Leader Intensive, which is a series of masterclasses and Ask Me Anything sessions. So really focused on micro learning. And we'd love to see as many leaders there as we can. So jump onto the website for all the information on either the Deliberate Leader Intensive or our Leader as Coach program. We do a bunch of other things here at the Deliberate Leader. We offer coaching, we do keynote speaking, we do a bunch of facilitation work, and it's really work that lights us up. So if you ever want to bounce any ideas, please reach out to either Jay or myself, and we would be more than happy to assist you with that. There's a little QR code which will give you access to our Deliberate Leader diagnostic if you've not completed that before. You can download a chapter of the book in there. E-copy, so you can't use it as a ruler. And then book in a complimentary deliberate check-in, which we're always very happy to do. The masterclasses we run monthly, and our next one is on the 16th of June. It's around sustaining your energy in leadership. So thanks again for coming along today. It's another couple of minutes. I'm happy to hang around. Otherwise, I'll let you get on with your day. Thanks everyone for coming along today.